The facility had always looked impenetrable from orbit. A lattice of obsidian towers and luminescent conduits suspended on the frozen plateau. But on this morning, as a sparse aurora clawed its way across the horizon, the scientists in the observation dome didn't notice the subtle tremor in the energy readings until it was too late. A low hum ran under the hum of their diagnostics, a frequency no human ear could detect, but the instruments screamed of it. Quantum flux spikes, irregular, almost deliberate. Dr. Lena Voss, chief theorist, squinted at the cascading readouts. "This isn't just noise," she muttered, fingers hovering over the console, tracing the anomalies with a precision born of obsessive familiarity. "It's coherent. Someone or something is modulating the fields, and it's not inside the lab." Outside, the first sign of intrusion wasn't the shadows against the ice or the distant shimmer of metallic hulls. It was the fracture in probability itself. Tiny ripples in the air, impossible patterns flickering at the edge of vision, like heat haze but denser, slower, more deliberate. Captain Elias Thorne, commander of the facility's rapid response contingent, recognized it instantly. He'd trained for conventional assaults, for orbital drops and sabotage, but the universe had just changed its rulebook. "Get me eyes on the anomaly," he barked, voice clipped, authoritative, cutting through the hushed panic of the lab technicians. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mara Chen, keyed the visual scanners, frowning at the abstract distortion overlaying the landscape. "It's bending light, sir, not refraction, displacement, maybe. Quantum displacement," Voss's voice cracked as she spoke, taut with disbelief. "If they've stabilized that field, they could be—" She didn't finish. The holographic map behind her rippled violently, and the first of the intruders stepped through. They were indistinct at first. Silhouettes with a shimmer that made their edges flicker between forms, solid and spectral at once. But Thorne's instincts kicked in, honed from decades of asymmetric conflict. Engage defensive perimeter, non-lethal containment until we understand what we're dealing with. The troops moved, plasma rifles humming to life, drones lifting silently into the brittle sky. Yet even as they advanced, the anomaly fractured further, and the intruders phased between conventional space and a shimmering overlay of probability. Shots passed through them like water, ricocheting off the ice with an eerie metallic clang that made everyone's stomach lurch. Voss staggered back from the console. "They're not physical in the conventional sense," she gasped. "They exist in multiple states simultaneously. We might be fighting shadows of them." Thorne's eyes narrowed. Shadows or not, they had to buy time. "Containment drones," he ordered, toggling a panel. Small drones, designed for hazardous material scenarios, zipped into the flickering forms, releasing magnetic nets infused with quantum dampeners. Experimental tech, Voss had theorized but never tested. The nets hit their targets with a flicker of resistance, and one intruder slowed, its form solidifying fractionally before slipping free. Thorne cursed under his breath. Adaptive. They're learning from us in real time. In the control room, Mara watched the feed, calculating. "Sir, every time they pass through the shield, the energy signature spikes. If we can predict the next phase point, maybe we can collapse the field locally." Thorne's jaw tightened. "Then do it, but not until we've secured the scientists." "Voss, status." She was tapping furiously, her hair sticking to her sweat-damp forehead. I can generate a harmonic counter-frequency. It won't last long, maybe 30 seconds, enough to disrupt their coherence temporarily. But," her hand trembled, "I've never done it under combat conditions." Thorne didn't flinch. "Then it's time to improvise." As the first real collision erupted on the icy plateau, the intruders phased in and out with increasing aggression. One shifted mid-attack, delivering kinetic strikes that seemed to bend through armor. Soldiers fell back, plasma scorches smearing across the ice, sparks flying from drones overloaded by the spectral interference. Thorne moved forward personally, coordinating fire teams while Mara directed drones to block probable escape vectors. "Predict, anticipate, exploit patterns," he growled. Each intruder's phasing had a rhythm, subtle but detectable. Thorne keyed a feed to Voss. "Now, hit the harmonic counter." The lab erupted in white-blue light as Voss activated the device. The frequency resonated across the plateau, and the flickering intruders convulsed, momentarily anchored to a single state. Soldiers seized the chance, nets latching on, and the first tangible capture occurred. The victory was fleeting. The intruders adapted again, phasing with even more unpredictable patterns, some dissolving entirely, only to reappear meters away. Thorn realized the fight was no longer about brute force. It was a game of anticipation, timing, and intellect. Meanwhile, deep in the subterranean layers of the facility, Dr. Anil Mehra, the quantum engineer, monitored subspace fluxes. He had been warning the higher-ups about the instability in the Multiverse project, but warnings had been dismissed as academic paranoia. Now the cracks were tangible. He studied the interference patterns, mapping potential origin points. They're using localized quantum tunneling, he muttered to himself. But that requires energy densities we can't generate, or can we? He traced back the anomalies to a series of experimental quantum nodes buried beneath the ice. Nodes that could theoretically destabilize the probability lattice in small, controlled bursts. His eyes widened. If we can reverse the polarity on a single node, maybe we can force them into coherence long enough to neutralize them, or at least understand them. Thorn's comm crackled. Mara's voice was tense. Sir, Voss is losing stability. The counter-frequency is faltering. They're about to break through the northern barrier. Thorn felt a cold knot in his chest. Losing the northern perimeter meant the core lab would be exposed. That core contained years of research, including the quantum bridge, the experimental device Voss had been building, the same one that could explain or exploit the multiverse. Fall back to secondary containment lines. Evacuate scientists if necessary. I'll hold them. The retreat was brutal. Soldiers fired from ice-covered bunkers, dodging phasing strikes that bent through reality. One of Thorn's lieutenants, a young officer named Cale Ramirez, tried to flank a particularly aggressive intruder, only to vanish mid-stride, reappearing shattered in a scatter of particles that rained over the ice. The remaining troops faltered, grief and fear mingling, but Thorn's voice cut through the chaos. Focus on the pattern. Predict, anticipate. Mara adjusted the drones to a layered orbit, using their electromagnetic pulses to disrupt the intruder's coherence for fleeting windows. Every second counted. Every miscalculation meant a loss of life or a breach. Voss, realizing the counter-frequency was too unstable for repeated cycles, improvised a harmonic modulation that pulsed in microbursts. It forced one intruder to anchor briefly, allowing Thorn to engage with a hand-carried kinetic disruptor. He struck, and the figure collapsed into a shimmering heap of probabilistic residue. The others recoiled, recalculating their moves. Thorn saw the glimmer of possibility. They could fight this, if they learned fast enough. In the observation dome, Mehra traced the intruder's energy patterns, cross-referencing them with the quantum nodes beneath the ice. They're tethered, he shouted, startling Voss. Each one is anchored to a node. Destroy or disrupt one, and the corresponding entity destabilizes. Voss's eyes flared with a mixture of awe and horror. That means we could predict where they'll appear next, but each node is heavily shielded. Any direct assault risks destroying the lab, and the bridge. Thorn's jaw tightened. Risk was part of his calculus, but annihilation wasn't acceptable. Then we adapt. Use the environment, use physics against them. No heroics, precision only. As night fell over the plateau, the aurora danced in fractured streaks of green and violet. The intruders had paused, perhaps assessing their adversaries. Thorn surveyed the battlefield through a panoramic lens, noting ice fissures, energy shadows, and the subtle vibrations in the frozen ground. We've learned something today, he murmured, almost to himself. They aren't invincible. They have limits, and we can exploit them, if we survive the night. Suddenly, the northern barrier shimmered violently, a wave of distortion pulsing outward. Mara's voice was sharp in his earpiece. Sir, they're not just phasing, they're coordinating through some kind of resonance, and it's targeting the bridge. If they hit it, her words froze as a massive pulse shattered the ice near the core lab, sending shards flying like glass knives. Alarms blared, red lights bathing the facility in an urgent glow. Soldiers scrambled to regroup. Voss's face was pale, eyes wide as she whispered, "This isn't just an attack. It's a probe. They're studying us, learning us." Thorn gritted his teeth. "Then we teach them a lesson first. Hold your positions. Keep the bridge intact. And Mara," he paused, the weight of command settling over him. "Find the pattern. Every flaw they reveal, we exploit. Every opening counts. Tonight, we survive. Tomorrow, we strike back." Outside, the intruders flickered one last time, their forms rippling in impossible ways, then receded into the fractured aurora like smoke in wind. The plateau was silent but charged with tension. soldiers and scientists alike aware that what had arrived was beyond any conventional war. Yet in that frozen night, Thorn allowed himself the barest spark of determination. The first skirmish had shown a weakness, and he would find it, exploit it, and make sure humanity did not lose its future to shadows that danced between worlds. The hum in the energy grid deepened. Somewhere beneath the ice, the nodes pulsed with potential, waiting, and Thorn knew with cold certainty that the next encounter would be far worse and far more decisive. The first night fell, but no one truly slept. The battlefield had shifted, not in location, but in the very rules of reality. And in that quiet terror, all of them realized the war had only just begun. The night was a living thing, dragging its cold fingers across the plateau as Thorn and his team dug in. The aurora had faded to thin ribbons of green light, leaving the ice brittle and pale under the harsh glow of emergency lamps. Soldiers huddled in makeshift trenches, plasma rifles ready, drones hovering in jittering orbits like anxious predators. The intruders had withdrawn for now, but the energy readings pulsed like a heartbeat, reminding everyone that their enemy was not gone, only observing. Voss and Mera worked side by side in the lab, faces lit by the cascading glow of holographic readouts. "We've got fragments," Voss muttered, rubbing her temple. "Fragments of their coherence patterns. They're not random, but they're adaptive, reactive to our energy signatures." Mera nodded, tapping on a secondary console. "I've cross-referenced the anomalies with the quantum nodes. If we can predict which node they're anchored to, we can force a localized coherence collapse. The problem is, it takes time to generate the polarity inversion, and the nodes draw massive power. Any miscalculation, and the node fries, or worse, the bridge, destabilizes." Thorn entered, his boots crunching on the brittle ice. Mara was already by the observation viewport, scanning the plateau with a low-frequency LiDAR sweep. "Status?" he demanded. Mara shook her head. "They're not moving, but their energy footprints are all over the map. If this is a resting phase, it's deceptive. They're probably calibrating, learning from our last engagement, and their resonance, something in the patterns they're syncing with our defensive grid. If we fire on one node without accounting for feedback, the whole facility could be at risk." Thorn gritted his teeth. "Then we prepare. Every team, every asset, assume the worst and adapt. We don't get lucky, we make them predictable." The morning brought a bitter wind that shredded the thin camouflage of the facility. Thorn convened a tactical briefing in the underground command center, a concrete shell beneath layers of ice and reinforced steel. Kyle Ramirez, the young officer who had narrowly survived the first skirmish, sat beside Thorn, pale but resolute. "Sir," he said, "we're down 20% of drones, 15% of personnel, and ammunition is holding. But we can't sustain repeated volleys against them. If they phase again," his voice faltered, "we'll lose more." Thorn studied the map projected in the center of the room. Small, flickering nodes of light marked the intruders' previous appearances. "They're relying on quantum anchoring, yes," he said, pointing. "Every time they phase, they align with a node. But we now have a traceable signature. That signature is predictable, on a short timescale. That's our window." Mara leaned over the console. "Short is relative. We're talking seconds before they adapt again." Thorn nodded. "Then seconds is what we use." Voss brought up a schematic of the harmonic modulator, the device she had improvised during the first skirmish. "If we upgrade the microburst cycles, we can force the intruders into coherence longer. The problem, repeated cycles overheat the emitter, and the feedback could collapse the bridge's quantum lattice. But if we stagger the pulses in coordination with tactical strikes, we could trap one or two at a time. Enough to study, or neutralize." Mera spoke up, voice grim. "Every microburst generates an energy spike. If they've been observing, they may anticipate it. We might not just be fighting them, we're teaching them our capabilities in real time." Thorn's jaw tightened. "Then we need decoys, misdirection, anything to break that learning curve. Small teams, rapid assaults, staggered bursts, and environmental leverage. Terrain masking, ice fissures, optical distortion, all of it." The first operation was launched at midday. Thorn led a recon team across the plateau, plasma rifles and kinetic disruptors in hand, drones providing cover and early warning. The air shimmered with residual quantum interference, making visibility deceptive. One of the soldiers, Private Lyra Anson, froze mid-step, her eyes widening. Thorn immediately signaled a halt. Mara's voice came through the comm. "They're testing your reaction. It's a lure. Don't engage until microburst window opens." Thorn's fist clenched. Keep moving. Use ice ridges for cover. Maintain line of sight only where necessary. They found the first node, a reinforced dome half buried in the ice. Energy readings pulsed erratically, confirming Mera's analysis. Thorn motioned for a drone to deliver a probe, a small sphere designed to embed sensors and emit low-level pulses. The intruders responded instantly, phasing in from the aurora like liquid metal. The first few pulses caught one of them, forcing temporary coherence. The team struck quickly, kinetic disruptors anchoring the intruder to the ice. But as soon as it was captured, another ripple displaced it entirely. Thorn realized the intruders had learned to fragment themselves across multiple probability nodes, a level of complexity he hadn't anticipated. The battle escalated quickly. Mara adjusted drones to create overlapping electromagnetic fields, forcing intermittent coherence windows. Soldiers advanced, measured shots exploiting these brief moments. Voss operated the microburst modulator, hands flying over controls, voice steady despite the sweat dripping down her temples. 2 seconds, Thorn! 2 seconds! Thorn nodded, firing a disruptor that sent the intruder crashing into a fissure in the ice. But as the team approached to secure the target, the ice buckled, sending Lyra sliding into a crevasse. Thorn reacted instantly, grabbing her arm and hauling her back, teeth gritted against the cold. Casualties, fatigue, and tension layered over each other in a grueling calculus of survival. By nightfall, the team had captured fragments of 3 intruders. The field data was enough to partially map the coherence patterns, but the cost was visible. 2 soldiers injured, 1 critical, and half the drone network fried by feedback loops. Voss and Mera analyzed the captured fragments in the lab. The fragments contain partial consciousness, Voss said, voice trembling. They retain memory of prior encounters. That means we can anticipate some behavior, but not all. Mehra added, their adaptation is exponential. We delay them now, but the next engagement will be faster, smarter, and deadlier. Thorn took a long moment, staring at the plateau through reinforced glass. The aurora had returned, thinner this time, ghost-like. Then we train faster, think faster, and when they move next, we hit first and hardest. Not recklessly, but precisely. Every failure teaches us. Every success buys us time. Political interference had already begun to complicate the picture. Liaison Officer Kyla Dren, a diplomat embedded to oversee the facility's research funding, arrived with a stern entourage. Captain Thorn, I must remind you that escalation has consequences. Every assault risks destabilizing not only the bridge, but international treaties regarding quantum experimentation. Thorn didn't turn. We're already at war with what defies every treaty. Every hesitation costs lives. If diplomacy can protect us from shadows that tear through probability, let them try. Kayla's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue further, at least not in front of the troops. Later, in the command center, she pulled Thorn aside. This isn't just about survival, she said softly. You're weaponizing multiverse-level anomalies. If containment fails, the consequences, Thorn cut her off. Containment will not fail. Not if we're smart. Not if we adapt. Her expression didn't change. She knew him too well. Thorn's confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the hard edge of desperation. The next engagement began pre-dawn. Thorn deployed staggered recon teams to the nodes with Mara coordinating drones to create electromagnetic interference corridors. Voss and Mera synchronized the microburst modulator to anticipate coherence windows, timing it to the millisecond. The first intruder emerged in partial coherence, immediately attacked, and was forced back into the ice fissure network. Another followed, this one fragmenting mid-strike, but the team had anticipated the split, sealing the secondary fragments with drones and kinetic nets. The operation was a success, but only just. Several soldiers were grazed by phase-shifting strikes, and the plateau itself had fractured under the energy pulses, creating unstable terrain. Afterward, Thorn held a debrief. We've learned 2 things, he said. First, we can predict the intruder's movements if we anchor to the nodes and force coherence. Second, every time we succeed, they adapt. Faster next time. That means we cannot rely solely on brute force or reaction. We must innovate. Logistics, terrain, physics, everything. Mara added, and we can't do it without constant recalibration. Their resonance changes every few minutes, and we're running out of drones and energy reserves. Thorn nodded. Then we improvise. That's what humans do best, but victory had its moral cost. Lyra Anson's injury had been severe. Frostbite coupled with phase-induced molecular destabilization. Soldiers whispered that seeing her hands partially deconstruct and reconstruct had been like watching someone dissolve into the void. Thorn didn't flinch, but inside, the weight of command pressed like a glacier. Every success came with scars, some visible, some internal. Even as the data from captured fragments promised a tactical advantage, he knew the intruders were evolving, and the next attack could be devastating. Late that evening, Mayra made a breakthrough. They're not just anchored to nodes, they're tethered to quantum probabilities we can measure. If we can create an interference pattern across all nodes simultaneously, we could lock them into a single probability state long enough to study or contain them fully. Voss stared at the schematic, realization dawning. That could work, but it requires perfect timing and coordination across multiple teams. Any mistiming, and we risk destabilizing the bridge. Worse, the energy feedback could obliterate anyone nearby. Thorn's expression hardened. Then we train for perfection. Every team, every pulse, every movement counts. Tomorrow, we escalate. Tomorrow, we take the fight to them with knowledge, not just reaction. And if we fail, he didn't finish. The room understood. Failure was not an option, because the stakes had escalated beyond survival. Control of the very multiverse threads they had been studying was at risk. As the facility settled into a tense night, the intruders' energy signatures pulsed faintly under the ice, as if mocking human ingenuity. Thorn walked the perimeter alone for a moment, breath-forming icy clouds. They're learning from us. We'll learn from them, and we'll survive, not by luck, but by discipline. Somewhere deep beneath the frozen plateau, the nodes hummed in unison, a low, vibrating reminder that the next encounter would be far more dangerous, far more revealing, and far more consequential. Thorn's hand tightened on his rifle as he stared into the darkness, knowing that the war for understanding and for survival was only just beginning. The sky began to pale with the first light of dawn, but Thorn didn't blink at it. The intruders would not wait for morning, and neither would he. The plateau had hardened under a thin crust of ice, every fissure a potential hazard, and every shimmer in the air a possible threat. Thorn and Mara led the reconnaissance teams through the fractured terrain before first light, the aurora faint and ghostly above them. Data from Voss and Mayra had given them enough insight to attempt an offensive operation. Raids on the nodes themselves, with the goal of capturing intruder fragments and severing their quantum anchoring. But this was no routine skirmish. The intruders were now anticipating human responses, adapting with a speed that made every misstep lethal. The first team moved in silence across the plateau, kinetic disruptors and drones layered in overlapping fields to produce coherence windows. Thorn observed the nodes through a spectral overlay, marking the anticipated appearance points of the intruders. Mara adjusted the drone formations, their low-level electromagnetic pulses designed to force intruder coherence just long enough to allow tactical strikes. "We're cutting it close," she murmured. "They've compressed the frequency adaptation cycle. We have seconds, not minutes." Thorn nodded, jaw tight. "Then every second counts. Execute precisely." The first node came into view, half buried in jagged ice. Thorn signaled, and Voss activated the microburst modulator. The harmonic pulses spread across the plateau, shimmering along the frozen surface. The intruders emerged, phasing in from probability shadows. But this time they were different. Smaller, more fragmented, almost splintered, as though the node itself had begun to strain under human interference. Thorn's team struck immediately, kinetic disruptors anchoring fragments to the ice. But one intruder reacted unpredictably, splitting into two separate entities. The secondary fragment moved toward another node, threatening to re-establish its anchor. Thorn gestured sharply. "Intercept now!" Mara directed drones in a rapid cross pattern, forcing the secondary fragment into temporary coherence. Soldiers fired, nets latching, but one fragment phased just enough to pass through the restraints, vanishing into the night. Thorn cursed. Every operation so far had taught them that success was measured in moments, not guarantees. He pulled back the remaining teams to regroup at a safe distance, while Voss analyzed the interference feedback. "Their adaptation rate is accelerating exponentially," she said. "We've slowed them, but we haven't broken the loop. We're teaching them our tactics as fast as we exploit theirs." The next target was a cluster of 3 nodes connected by subsurface conduits. Mehra had warned that the conduits amplified energy feedback if mismanaged, potentially destabilizing all 3 nodes simultaneously. Thorn weighed the risk. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions," he said. "We'll stagger the pulses, synchronized with drones and strike teams. Timing is critical." Mara worked through the coordination algorithm, fingers flying over the console. All windows aligned, sequence ready in 30 seconds. As the team advanced, the first drone relay was knocked out by a sudden phase strike, a ripple of interference that displaced energy across the ice. Mara cursed, reallocating remaining drones in real time. Thorn's comm buzzed with fragments of tactical chatter. "Node 3 compromised. Repeat, Node 3 compromised." Thorn pivoted, directing teams to intercept. One soldier, Ramirez, took a direct hit, his armor phasing with the intruder's strike, causing localized molecular instability. Thorn grabbed him, dragging him behind an ice ridge, teeth clenched against adrenaline and fury. "Hold on, Ramirez. Don't you dare die on me," he growled, checking for pulse and injuries. Meanwhile, Voss was manipulating the harmonic modulator, staggering microbursts in precise intervals. The pulses caught 2 of the intruder fragments, forcing coherence long enough for capture. Mehra monitored energy feedback, adjusting the polarity to prevent conduit overload. But the intruders responded with coordinated resonance pulses of their own. Energy arcs lanced through the ice, fracturing terrain and forcing soldiers to scatter. Thorn saw Mara flip the drone network mid-flight, creating a temporary electromagnetic shield that saved a critical strike team from being shredded. By midday, the team had secured 2 nodes and several fragments. Each capture offered insight into the intruder's behavior, revealing memory patterns and adaptive learning. Thorn studied the fragments in the field lab, noting subtle variations in phase coherence. "They're learning from us in real time," he said grimly. "Every pulse, every net, every disruptor, they're observing. But that also gives us something they can't anticipate: mistakes." The operation seemed successful, but subtle warnings had already begun to appear. Voss noticed irregularities in the captured fragment's energy readings. "Sir, they're transmitting something," she said, eyes wide. "Not data we can read directly, but a signal. They're coordinating, even while captured." Thorn's hand went to his communicator. "Mara, run a counter-frequency sweep. Scramble any outgoing coherence signals." "Do it now." Mara's fingers flew over the controls. The drones adjusted, microbursts layered to block quantum transmissions. For a moment, silence reigned across the plateau. Then it broke. One of the captured fragments destabilized violently, sending an energy pulse that cascaded through the nearby ice nodes. Alarms blared in the facility. Soldiers were thrown off balance by the shockwave, and a fissure opened beneath the secondary strike team. Thorn reacted instantly, pulling a soldier from the edge, while Mara rerouted remaining drones to stabilize the area. The pulse had a secondary effect. The intruders elsewhere had adapted, shifting patterns that now made the next anticipated coherence window almost unpredictable. As Thorn assessed the damage, an unexpected report crackled through. "Sir, we've got movement near the eastern perimeter. Unknown hostiles. Non-phased signatures." Thorn frowned. The intruders rarely behaved in unphased form. "Identify," he ordered. Mara's visual feed adjusted, revealing human silhouettes clad in armor similar to Thorn's troops. But the way they moved suggested training and tactics not typical of any known faction. "Sir, it's a unit from the consortium," Mara said slowly. "They're working with the intruders." Betrayal hit like ice water. Thorn's mind raced. A consortium unit would know standard defensive protocols, drone deployment, and likely the layout of the nodes. Any misstep could compromise the entire operation. "Hold positions. Do not engage until I give the order. We're not fighting a skirmish, we're negotiating survival," he said. But even as he spoke, Mara's drones reported that the consortium operatives had already started coordinating microstrikes on node defenses, manipulating energy fluxes to disrupt the human microburst cycles. Voss spoke up, voice tense. "They've hacked the interference patterns. If they succeed, the intruders will be free from our temporary coherence traps." Thorn's jaw tightened. "Then we make it impossible for them to succeed. Split teams. I'll take the northern nodes, Mara covers the southern. Everyone else, neutralize consortium operatives and resecure nodes. Precision, not heroics. Every second matters." The battlefield fractured into chaos. Thorn's team moved through ice corridors, careful to avoid fissures created by prior energy pulses. Shots rang out, not in traditional volleys, but precise bursts intended to destabilize equipment and delay consortium units. Mara's drones created overlapping electromagnetic shields, forcing intruder fragments into coherence long enough for human teams to counteract the consortium sabotage. Soldiers adapted on the fly, improvising with ice ridges, frozen outcrops, and reflective surfaces to manipulate energy pulses, redirecting them into safe dispersal points. The confrontation was brutal. Consortium operatives had learned human tactics and were aggressively exploiting terrain advantages. Ramirez, despite injuries from the prior engagement, took a risk to block a corridor, buying crucial seconds for his squad. Thorne's voice carried over comms. "Cover him! Do not let them break through! Hold the nodes!" The team coordinated microbursts and kinetic strikes with near-military precision, pushing the intruder fragments and human collaborators back. Yet, the cost was severe. Lyra Anson, still recovering, was injured again in the eastern corridor by residual phase energy. Thorne's hands shook as he pulled her to safety. "You're not leaving me. Not today," he whispered, adjusting her armor to minimize molecular destabilization. Voss and Mera worked frantically in tandem, recalibrating microbursts to maintain coherence windows. The lab's energy reserves were nearing critical limits. Every pulse drained reactors that could not be refueled in the field. By evening, the northern nodes were stabilized, but only after severe attrition. Soldiers were exhausted, drones damaged, and energy reserves low. Mara reported that the southern nodes were barely holding. Interference patterns remained unstable. Thorne's stomach knotted as he reviewed casualty reports. The consortium had vanished during the chaos, leaving behind traces of sabotage and a stark warning. The intruders had allies, or at least human collaborators, capable of high-level coordination. In the lab, Voss studied the captured fragments, noticing an emergent behavior. Fragmented intruder units were learning from both human and consortium tactics. "They're evolving faster than anticipated," she said. "Every capture, every assault, they learn and adapt. If we continue at this rate, tomorrow's engagement will be exponentially harder." Mara's voice was tight. "Then we need a new plan. We can't just react anymore. We need to set the battlefield, manipulate probabilities before they even appear." Thorne considered the plateau through the observation viewport. The fissures, broken nodes, and residual energy distortions had created a hazardous, unstable environment. But it was also an opportunity. "Then we bait them," he said. "We force them into a controlled zone, limit their probability options, and hit them where we can dictate the terms. But we'll need coordination, discipline, and sacrifices. No one gets a free pass." That night, the aurora fractured into violent green and violet streaks, as if reflecting the chaos below. Thorne checked his squads one final time. Faces were grim, armor dented, rifles scuffed. Every one of them had seen the edge of human capability tested against forces that bent reality itself. Yet determination burned in their eyes. The next operation would not be a skirmish. It would be an offensive strike against the intruders' network, an attempt to take the fight to their infrastructure, and finally, to force them to reveal their limits. As Thorne watched the horizon, a low hum resonated beneath the ice, subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The intruders were already reacting. They were learning, and Thorne realized, with a mix of dread and clarity, that the upcoming engagement would not just test human ingenuity, it might redefine it. Somewhere beneath the frozen plateau, energy nodes pulsed in sync while above soldiers, drones, and scientists braced themselves. The stage was set for the most consequential engagement yet. And in the shadows, the consortium waited, their intentions hidden, their allegiance uncertain, ready to strike at the precise moment that human error emerged. Thorne's hand tightened on his rifle. Then we make no mistakes. Not one. The plateau had become a crucible of frozen steel and fractured ice. Every fissure and ridge was mapped in Thorne's mind like a battlefield etched into bone. After the last engagement, the team had retreated to regroup, repairing drones, and redistributing energy reserves for the coming operation. This would not be a reactive mission. It had to be decisive, multi-vector, coordinated down to the millisecond. Failure was no longer acceptable. Thorne gathered his squad in the command center. The map projected across the room showed every active node, the positions of intruder fragments captured, and the residual interference fields. "We hit them simultaneously on 3 axes, he explained, voice firm and controlled. "Northern node, central conduit, southern ridge. Mara, you handle southern approach with drones and microbursts. Voss, Mara, you maintain modulation from the lab and coordinate timing. Ramirez and Lyra, recovering or not, you take the central conduit. Every pulse must be precise. Any deviation, and we lose the entire operation. Mara nodded, already overlaying drone flight paths across the plateau. I've calculated coherence windows down to 2 milliseconds. If we synchronize with lab modulation, we can force them into predictable states long enough to disrupt anchoring. But it will drain the reactors to critical levels. Thorne's jaw tightened. Then we manage the drain. Nothing else matters. The first phase began before dawn, under a pale green aurora that fractured like jagged glass across the horizon. Thorne's team moved swiftly, using the broken ice formations to mask line of sight. The intruders were waiting, but this time they did not immediately attack. Instead, they hovered, fragmented and flickering, as if analyzing every movement. Thorne keyed his comms. Steady. Wait for microburst. Voss initiated the harmonic modulation sequence. The field pulsed across the plateau, synchronized with Mara's drone formations. Intruder fragments anchored briefly, forced into coherence, revealing vulnerabilities for the first time at scale. Thorne's squads struck simultaneously, kinetic disruptors latching fragments to ice, while soldiers neutralized nodes with electromagnetic dampeners. The northern node collapsed partially, destabilizing fragments anchored there. It was a calculated, precise strike, the culmination of weeks of adaptation and improvisation. But the intruders had learned, and they retaliated unpredictably. A secondary cluster of fragments targeted the central conduit, exploiting a weak moment in the pulse timing. Ramirez reacted instantly, firing a disruptor while coordinating drones to create a layered electromagnetic shield. One fragment phased mid-attack, but his rapid adaptation and intuition allowed him to anchor it just long enough for Lyra to secure the capture. Both were visibly exhausted. Molecular destabilization from the fragments left them jittery and drained. Thorne noted it silently, aware of the human limits being pushed. Meanwhile, Mara observed the southern ridge, noting intruder behavior diverging from previous engagements. They're fragmenting preemptively, she reported. They've anticipated part of our sequence and are splitting across micronodes. If we don't adjust, we'll lose coherence entirely. Thorne reacted immediately. Voss, alter microburst sequence. Stagger the pulses to trap fragments in successive coherence windows. Mara, redirect drones to reinforce. The field responded, pulsing in layered bursts, forcing intruders into fragmented alignment. Soldiers advanced with precision, exploiting temporary coherence to disable nodes and capture additional fragments. But then a new threat emerged. Consortium operatives reappeared, using captured drones and modified energy pulses to destabilize the harmonic field. One operative targeted the northern node with a disruptive polarity inversion. Mara's voice was sharp. They're trying to collapse the node. Redirect all available drone energy to shield it. Thorne moved quickly, deploying his strike team to intercept. The confrontation was brutal but surgical. Consortium operatives were skilled, exploiting terrain and timing. But Thorne's team had anticipated their tactics. One operative was disabled with a controlled energy surge, while another vanished mid-attack, likely phasing away into the aurora. The northern node remained intact, though damaged. Thorne exhaled sharply. Every second had been a delicate balance between survival and catastrophe. At the central conduit, Ramirez and Lyra faced their own crucible. Fragmented intruder entities attempted to overwhelm them, phasing in rapid sequences designed to bypass kinetic disruptors. Ramirez improvised, using reflective ice surfaces to redirect microbursts and force fragments into predictable paths. Lyra, drawing on a blend of adrenaline and training, secured one fragment while stabilizing another with a portable electromagnetic clamp. Both were burning through reserves, and every movement carried the risk of molecular destabilization. Voss and Mara worked frantically from the lab, monitoring feedback loops and adjusting pulse sequences. We've got simultaneous resonance spikes from 2 nodes, Voss shouted. If they synchronize with the central conduit, we could lose all coherence control. Mara's fingers flew over the console. Then we force the phase alignment manually. It'll overload the reactors temporarily, but we can contain the energy. Thorne keyed in. Do it. Maximum output. Now. The harmonic field surged, cascading through the plateau in a synchronized wave. Intruder fragments wavered, trapped in forced coherence. Soldiers capitalized immediately, striking, securing, and neutralizing with precision. It was working, but at a high cost. One of Mara's drones overloaded, collapsing in a shower of sparks. Ramirez's armor cracked under residual phase energy. Lyra's hands trembled from repeated exposure. Thorne's teeth clenched. This was a victory measured in fractions of survival. Then came the pivotal moment. One intruder fragment, larger than the rest, anchored directly to the bridge's power conduit. Its presence threatened to collapse the entire operation, if not neutralized instantly. Thorn calculated the risk. A direct strike could destabilize the bridge, but hesitation meant loss. He gestured to Mara. "Prepare maximum drone interference. Voss, full polarity inversion on my mark. Everyone else, cover the conduit." The pulse hit. Light flared. Drones hummed at critical load. Energy rippled through the ice. The fragment convulsed, forced into full coherence. Thorn stepped forward, kinetic disruptor humming, striking with precision. The entity collapsed, immobilized. The plateau trembled under the feedback, fissures widening dangerously. But the node held. Every team member breathed heavily, exhausted but alive. Amid the chaos, a consortium operative emerged from a hidden fissure, hands raised. "Stop, we surrender." Thorn's rifle tracked them instinctively. Mara keyed comms. "Sir, they might be willing to cooperate, or it's a trap." Thorn weighed the risk, reading the operative's stance, the way their weight shifted, the hesitation in their movements. Finally, he nodded. "Contain, extract information." No mistakes, the operative was secured, revealing critical intelligence. The consortium had been experimenting with controlled quantum resonance, attempting to weaponize the intruder's coherence manipulation. They had allies, resources, and knowledge of node infrastructure, but their defection offered Thorn and his team unprecedented insight. How the intruders coordinated, where their vulnerabilities lay, and how human ingenuity could exploit both. By late evening, the plateau was littered with captured fragments, neutralized nodes, and exhausted soldiers. The harmonic modulation field was stabilized, but the reactors were near critical thresholds. Damage reports indicated several nodes irreparably fractured, fissures threatening collapse, and energy feedback causing minor structural damage to the bridge. Thorn surveyed the scene from a ridge, aurora light reflecting off his frost-smeared visor. "We've won today," he muttered, "but the war isn't over. We've taken the fight to them, but they're learning faster than we ever anticipated." Voss approached, exhausted, hair plastered to her forehead. "We've got enough data from the captured fragments to map full coherence behavior patterns," she said. "If we analyze them thoroughly, we can predict intruder movements, maybe even anticipate next attack windows." Thorn nodded. "Then we do that, and we prepare. Because the next strike will be unlike anything we've faced," Mara added, voice low but determined. "The nodes aren't invincible. The intruders can be forced into a single probability lattice long enough to neutralize or study them fully. But it will require total coordination, precision timing, and sacrifices. No shortcuts, no improvisation." Thorn's gaze hardened. "Then that's what we'll do. Everyone has a role. Everyone knows the stakes. Discipline will win this war, not luck." As the team began post-operation repairs, a subtle hum emanated from beneath the ice. Intruder energy signatures flickered faintly, residual but coherent. Thorn realized, with a mixture of dread and clarity, that the intruders were not defeated, only delayed. They were adapting, learning, evolving, and the next engagement would test the very limits of human ingenuity, courage, and coordination. The aurora fractured overhead, a silent reminder of the plateau's dangerous beauty. Thorn walked the perimeter, rifle slung, comms quiet. Each team member had endured exhaustion, injury, and fear, yet determination burned in their eyes. He knew sacrifices had been made, some irreparable, but tonight, humanity had forced the first true foothold against entities that defied conventional reality. And in that quiet, cold tension, Thorn understood what the final operation would require. Not heroics, not luck, but total human discipline, synchronization, and the willingness to pay every cost necessary. Somewhere beneath the ice, the nodes pulsed with residual energy, awaiting the next engagement. Thorn clenched his fists. "Tomorrow we finish this," he whispered. The plateau was silent, but the war for the multiverse threads had only just reached its decisive hour. The plateau was quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, but every soldier, scientist, and drone operator knew that silence was a lie. Energy hums pulsed beneath the ice, subtle but insistent, like the heartbeat of something immense. Thorn moved through the command center, reviewing overlays of the nodes, intruder fragments, and interference patterns. Every microburst, every drone, every pulse had to be executed with absolute precision. This was not just an operation, it was the final engagement. The multiverse threads themselves hung in the balance. Thorn addressed the assembled teams, his voice calm but steel-edged. We've trained, we've adapted, and we've survived. Today we strike at the heart of their coherence network. Northern nodes, central conduit, southern ridge, every axis synchronized. Mara, you orchestrate drones and microbursts. Voss, Mehra maintain harmonic modulation. Ramirez and Lyra, central conduit assault. Everyone else, cover, coordinate, and survive. Timing is life. 1 second off, one misstep, and the bridge collapses. Understand? A chorus of nods and murmurs affirmed readiness. The weight of anticipation was tangible. Eyes hardened, fists clenched, hearts steeled. The first light of dawn streaked across the fractured ice, aurora ribbons reflecting in shards across the plateau. Thorn keyed comms. Phase 1. Now. Voss initiated the harmonic modulation, microbursts rippling across the ice in staggered, perfectly timed intervals. Mara's drones flared into action, creating overlapping electromagnetic shields and force corridors, forcing intruder fragments into temporary coherence. The intruders responded immediately. They phased in multiple clusters, larger and more numerous than before, their fragmented forms converging on the nodes. Thorn's teams engaged with surgical precision. Kinetic disruptors anchored fragments while soldiers executed coordinated strikes, exploiting brief windows of forced coherence. Fissures opened beneath advancing intruders. Ice shards sprayed, and electromagnetic shields shimmered with overload heat. But every move was calculated, rehearsed, and executed. At the northern node, Mara observed unusual behavior. An intruder fragment splitting into 4 simultaneous probabilities. They're attempting recursive coherence, splitting to multiply their adaptive learning, she shouted. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Then we force the recursion into a controlled lattice. Layer the pulses, maximum output. Boss, now! The harmonic field surged, waves of energy rippling across the plateau. The fragments convulsed under forced coherence, disoriented and vulnerable. Soldiers moved in, capturing and neutralizing with pinpoint accuracy. Meanwhile, the central conduit became a crucible of chaos. Ramirez and Lyra faced fragments that phased at speeds previously unrecorded. Every strike risked destabilization of their molecular structure. Ramirez improvised, using reflective ice surfaces to redirect microbursts, while Lyra anchored fragments with portable electromagnetic clamps. The central conduit trembled under energy feedback. One fragment lunged directly at the conduit's core, threatening collapse. Thorn assessed risk and signaled. Maximum polarity inversion. Contain it at all costs. Voss and Mehra executed instantly. Energy cascaded across the conduit, forcing the fragment into full coherence. Ramirez and Lyra immobilized it just as it threatened the bridge infrastructure. The southern ridge was Mara's crucible. Intruders attempted coordinated phasing, bypassing kinetic disruptors. Mara adapted drone patterns mid-flight, creating dynamic interference grids to corral fragments. Soldiers advanced along unstable ice ridges, timing steps with microburst pulses. One fragment anchored near a fissure threatening collapse. Mara directed a synchronized energy surge to stabilize both the fragment and terrain, allowing the team to secure it. Exhaustion was palpable, muscles screamed, minds burned, but discipline held. Then, the final test, the largest intruder entity emerged from beneath the central node, a swirling mass of fragmented probabilities, anchored directly to the bridge's power core. Its presence threatened total collapse. Thorn weighed options. A direct strike could destabilize the network, but hesitation meant annihilation of the entire operation. All axes focus maximum output on the central node, he commanded. Drones, microbursts, and soldiers converged. A ballet of calculated violence and precision. The fragment resisted, phasing violently, but the harmonic modulation field had been perfected. Every pulse, every wave, every drone placement forced the entity into coherence long enough to anchor it. Thorn stepped forward, kinetic disruptor humming, striking with precise timing. Energy cascaded through the fragment. It convulsed and collapsed into a coherent state, immobilized. The plateau shook as residual energy rippled, fissures widening but nodes stabilized. Soldiers cheered, but the victory was sober, measured, costly. Amid the aftermath, the consortium operative who had defected stepped forward, hands raised. The network, it's contained but not destroyed, they said. Further attempts to exploit intruder coherence require total synchronization. Any misalignment, and it could tear through probability fields uncontrollably. Thorne's gaze was steady. Then we stabilize, study, and build doctrine. Lives have been lost, but we've gained understanding and control. Ramirez collapsed against ice, Lyra leaning on him, both breathing heavily. Mara and Thorne surveyed the plateau, counting casualties and assessing remaining energy reserves. Several soldiers were injured from phase backlash, drones had burned out, and nodes were partially damaged, but the network was contained. Thorne addressed the teams. Discipline, precision, and coordination won today, not luck. Remember that. Every sacrifice mattered. Every calculated risk paid off. This is the doctrine we carry forward. Voss and Mera worked rapidly, analyzing captured intruder fragments. Data streamed, revealing complete coherence patterns, memory imprints, and probability behaviors. We've got everything we need to anticipate any future activity, Voss said, voice strained but triumphant. Mehera added, and we now know the limits, their evolution, adaptability, and response windows. Humanity can predict, contain, and if necessary, neutralize them in future engagements. The plateau began stabilization procedures. Energy nodes were reinforced, fissures monitored, and microburst modulator systems set to stand by. Soldiers, exhausted and battered, huddled for warmth, eyes reflecting aurora light. Thorne moved among them, silently acknowledging their endurance. You faced entities that defy reality itself, he said quietly, and you survived. You've earned this moment. As night fell, the aurora fractured into green and violet ribbons, reflecting off ice like shards of stained glass. Thorne stood at the command center viewport, watching the plateau. Captured intruder fragments rested in secure containment. Harmonic modulation fields maintained delicate stability, and the consortium operative was integrated into the analysis team. The battle was over, but the war of understanding and preparation had only begun. He thought of Lyra and Ramirez, fatigue etched into their faces, of Mara coordinating drones with unwavering precision, of Voss and Mera pushing the limits of science under pressure. Every one of them had contributed to a victory born not of luck or convenience, but discipline, coordination, and sacrifice. The plateau, though scarred and unstable, now symbolized a hard-won foothold in the fight against forces that could unravel reality itself. Thorne allowed himself a brief moment to exhale. The cost had been immense, but so was the knowledge gained. Protocols were rewritten, doctrine refined, and human capability, grit, ingenuity, and adaptability had proven decisive against an adversary that bent the very rules of existence. Yet beneath the ice, nodes hummed faintly, residual energy lingering. Thorne knew the intruders were still learning, still adapting. But for the first time, humanity had set the terms of engagement. He keyed comms to Mara. Prepare full containment sequence. Monitor for anomalies. Every pulse, every fragment, every probability state. We control now. Mara's voice was steady. Acknowledged, sir. Full sequence engaged. In the quiet that followed, the aurora danced overhead, a fractured mirror of the plateau below. Thorne allowed himself one final reflection. Survival had never been guaranteed. Victory had been earned through understanding, coordination, and sacrifice. Every team member, every calculation, every risk had mattered. Humanity had survived against a force that defied probability itself, and in doing so, had written a new doctrine for engagement against the unknown. The plateau settled into relative calm, energy nodes stabilized, drones repaired, and soldiers resting. Thorne walked among them, ensuring order, observing recovery, and noting lessons for future operations. The multiverse threads had been protected, coherence contained, and the bridge secured. Humanity had learned the limits of its ingenuity, and the boundless scope of its courage. As the first true dawn broke over the fractured plateau, Thorne's gaze swept across the horizon. The aurora faded to soft golds and whites, the ice reflecting a momentary peace. He knew the intruders would adapt, that new threats might emerge, and that humanity's vigilance could never waver. But for the first time, he felt certainty. Discipline, coordination, and calculated sacrifice were more powerful than any raw, untempered force. The battle was over. The plateau was scarred. Lives had been lost, but the multiverse, and humanity's place within it, had endured, and the doctrine forged in those frozen hours would guide every future engagement, ensuring that even in the face of forces beyond comprehension, humanity would not falter. Thorne exhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill his lungs. Somewhere deep beneath the ice, the energy nodes pulsed faintly, silent witnesses to the cost, the discipline, and the ultimate victory. The plateau would heal, the team would recover, and the lessons learned, etched into every fiber of their being, would endure far longer than the aurora's light. For the first time in months, Thorn allowed himself a small, measured smile. Humanity had survived, humanity had adapted, and humanity had won, not by chance, but by its own relentless determination.